Aisha Nwosu adjusted the strap of her carry-on bag as she stepped onto the plane, the low hum of the cabin a familiar sound after years of international travel. She'd just wrapped up a week in London, where she'd spoken at a climate policy forum about sustainable urban development in underserved communities. Her voice had been steady, her points sharp, and the room, filled mostly with older men in tailored suits, had listened. Not always with agreement, but with respect. That was enough for her. She wasn't there to be liked. She was there to be heard. Now, as she walked down the aisle of the business-class cabin, she felt the quiet exhaustion that always followed a high-stakes week. Her feet ached slightly from heels she only wore for panels, and her mind was already drifting toward home, toward her 2 kids, who'd FaceTimed her every night with drawings and questions about Mommy's big trip. She smiled at the memory as she found her seat, 4A, window side. The leather was cool, the space generous. She stowed her bag, smoothed her linen blouse, and buckled in. Outside, rain streaked the tarmac under gray London skies. She welcomed the gloom. It matched her mood, tired but satisfied. The flight attendant who greeted her was polite but brisk, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Aisha didn't take it personally. She'd flown enough to know that airline crews worked brutal hours, often on little sleep, managing hundreds of personalities in a pressurized metal tube. She gave a quiet thank you as a warm towel was handed to her, then settled back, closing her eyes for a moment before takeoff. The plane lifted smoothly into the clouds, and soon the cabin lights dimmed. Dinner service began. Aisha ordered the vegetarian option, roasted squash with quinoa, and a glass of sparkling water. Everything arrived neatly plated, the cutlery gleaming.
She ate slowly, savoring the quiet.
Around her, passengers typed on laptops, sipped wine, or dozed under soft blankets. It felt like any other long-haul flight, orderly, predictable, uneventful. Then came the second drink service. She hadn't asked for anything beyond water. But the same flight attendant from earlier approached with a tray of beverages. "Coca-Cola?" the woman asked, not looking at Aisha, already reaching for a can. "No, thank you," Aisha said gently. "Just water, if you have it." The attendant paused, then sighed, just audibly enough to register. "We're out of still water. Only sparkling." "That's fine," Aisha replied, keeping her tone light. "I'll take sparkling then." The woman nodded, grabbed a small bottle, and placed it on Aisha's tray. But as she turned to leave, her elbow knocked against the open can of Coke she'd been holding for the passenger behind. The can tipped. A full, ice-cold stream of dark soda poured directly onto Aisha's lap, soaking through her blouse and pooling in the folds of her trousers. Aisha gasped, not from pain, but from shock. The liquid was cold, sticky, and spreading fast. She instinctively stood up, trying to minimize the mess, her heart pounding. "I'm so sorry," the attendant said, but her voice lacked warmth. She didn't offer a napkin, didn't reach for a towel, just stood there, arms crossed slightly, as if waiting for Aisha to sit back down and stop causing a disruption. Aisha looked down at her clothes. The dark fabric hid some of the stain, but the wetness was unmistakable. She felt eyes on her from nearby seats. Embarrassment prickled her skin, but beneath it something harder began to form. "Could I please get a towel or something to clean up?" she asked, voice calm but firm. The attendant glanced toward the galley. "We're short on supplies. You'll have to wait until after service." "But I'm soaked," Aisha said, keeping her voice level. "This isn't just a spill, it's a full can." The woman's expression tightened. "Accidents happen. It's not like I did it on purpose." Aisha took a breath. She'd been here before, in meetings where her ideas were dismissed with a shrug, in stores where clerks followed her just in case, in airports where security pulled her aside, randomly, every single time. She knew the script. Stay composed. Don't give them a reason to call you angry. Don't make a scene, but this wasn't about anger. It was about basic decency. "I'm not blaming you for the accident," Aisha said evenly. "I'm asking for help cleaning it up. That's all." The attendant rolled her eyes just slightly and muttered something under her breath as she walked away. Aisha didn't catch the words, but the tone was clear. "You're being difficult." A few minutes later, a different crew member, a man with kind eyes and a name tag that read Elias, approached with a stack of warm towels. "I heard what happened," he said quietly, handing her 2. "I'm really sorry. Let me get you a dry blanket too." Aisha accepted the towels with genuine gratitude. Thank you. That means a lot, Elias nodded. Some days are harder than others. But that's no excuse. She dabbed at her blouse, knowing it wouldn't fully come out, but appreciating the gesture. For a moment, she thought the worst was over. But then the original attendant returned, this time with the senior cabin manager, a woman in her 50s with a crisp uniform and an air of authority. She didn't look at Aisha. Instead, she addressed Elias sharply. "Why are you giving out extra linens without approval?" Elias stammered an explanation, but the manager cut him off. "We have protocols. You can't just hand things out because someone complains," Aisha finally spoke up. "I didn't complain. I asked for a towel after being drenched in soda." The manager turned to her, expression unreadable. "Ma'am, we understand you're upset, but we're doing our best with limited resources. Creating a disturbance isn't helpful." Aisha blinked. "I haven't raised my voice. I haven't demanded anything unreasonable. I simply asked for basic assistance after an accident your crew caused." The manager's lips thinned. "We've provided what we can. Please return to your seat and allow us to continue service." The message was clear. Your discomfort is inconvenient. "Sit down, be quiet." Aisha sat, not because she agreed, but because she knew the power dynamic in that cabin. She was one woman. They were the authority. Arguing further would only paint her as the angry black woman, a label she'd spent a lifetime dodging. She spent the next several hours in damp clothes, the stickiness clinging to her skin like a second layer of shame. She tried to read, to sleep, to distract herself, but the incident replayed in her mind. Not the spill itself, that was an accident. It was the refusal to acknowledge her humanity afterward that stung. The lack of apology, the defensiveness, the way her request for a simple towel was treated like a personal attack. When the plane finally landed in Atlanta, she gathered her things quickly, avoiding eye contact with the crew. Outside, the Georgia air was thick and warm, a welcome contrast to the sterile chill of the cabin. She walked through the terminal, her steps quickening as she neared the arrivals gate. Her husband, Darian, was waiting with their kids, 7-year-old Zuri holding a handmade sign that read, "Welcome home, Mommy," and 4-year-old Kofi jumping up and down. The moment she saw them, the tightness in her chest loosened. Zuri ran to her, wrapping small arms around her waist. "You smell like soda," she said, wrinkling her nose. Aisha laughed, a real laugh despite everything. "Long story, baby." Darian stepped forward, taking her bag and studying her face. He knew her well enough to see the fatigue, the quiet hurt beneath the surface. He didn't ask questions right away, just kissed her forehead and said, "Let's get you home." In the car, with the kids chattering in the back seat about school and cartoons, Aisha finally exhaled. She told Darian what happened. Not with drama, not with rage, just the facts. The spill, the refusal to help, the implication that she was overreacting. He listened in silence, his hands steady on the wheel. When she finished, he reached over and squeezed her hand. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," he said simply. She nodded. "It's not the first time. Probably won't be the last." But as they pulled into their driveway under the soft glow of porch lights, Aisha didn't know that this time would be different. This time, someone with real power had been listening, not just to the story, but to the silence behind it. And sometimes silence speaks louder than any demand. Darian Voss didn't say much that night. He helped Aisha change into dry clothes, made her a cup of ginger tea, the kind she liked after long flights, and sat with her on the back porch while the kids slept upstairs. The Georgia night was warm, crickets humming in the trees, the sky scattered with stars that seemed brighter away from the city lights. He let the silence stretch, knowing she'd talk when she was ready. When she finally spoke, it wasn't with anger. It was quieter than that, more tired than furious. She told him everything. The spill, the lack of apology, the way the crew had treated her request like a personal inconvenience. She even mimicked the flight attendant's sigh, the way the senior manager had looked past her like she was part of the mess on the floor. Darian listened, not the way people often do, half listening while already forming a response, but really listened. His eyes stayed on hers, his posture open, his silence respectful. He'd seen this before, not just with Aisha, but with his mother, his sisters, friends, brilliant, composed black women who carried themselves with grace, only to be met with indifference or suspicion in spaces that claimed to welcome everyone. After she finished, he didn't jump to solutions. He didn't promise revenge or make grand declarations. He just asked one question, soft and steady. Do you want me to do something about this? Aisha hesitated. She knew what he was capable of. Darian wasn't just wealthy. He'd built Viridian Dynamics from a small engineering startup into a global leader in sustainable infrastructure. His company designed solar-powered transit hubs, green housing for low-income neighborhoods, and clean water systems across 3 continents. He had influence, real influence. But Aisha had always been careful not to let his success define her. She'd carved her own path, earned her own respect. She didn't want this moment to become about his power. I don't want a spectacle, she said finally. I don't need headlines, I wish they'd seen me as a person. Not a problem, Darian nodded. Then we'll make sure they understand what that costs. He didn't say more that night. But as soon as Aisha fell asleep, he went to his home office. Not to rage, not to plot, but to act. He opened his laptop, typed a few messages, and within minutes his executive assistant, Lena, was on a secure call. By 2 a.m., Viridian's legal team had pulled the flight manifest, crew roster, and service logs for that specific route. They cross-referenced it with internal airline partnership records. Within hours, they knew the names of everyone involved, their roles, and, most importantly, the airline's contractual obligations to Viridian through a joint clean energy initiative. But Darian wasn't thinking about lawsuits. He was thinking about accountability. The next morning, over breakfast, Aisha watched him scroll through emails, his expression unreadable. Zuri was drawing at the table, Kofi stacking blocks into wobbly towers. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows. It felt like any other Saturday, except for the quiet intensity in Darian's movements. You're not going to do anything reckless, are you? Aisha asked gently, pouring coffee. He looked up. Nothing reckless. Just necessary. Later that day, he called the CEO of Skyward Airlines, not through layers of assistance, but directly. They'd met once before at a sustainability summit. Darian didn't lead with accusations. He laid out the facts: date, flight number, time, names. He described Aisha's experience without embellishment. Then he said, Your team failed a basic test of human decency. I expect every individual who refused to assist her, or dismissed her request, to be removed from customer-facing duties immediately. And I want a full review of your crew training on bias, de-escalation, and emergency response to passenger distress. The CEO, a man named Robert Hale, was taken aback. He offered the usual corporate script. We take all complaints seriously. An internal investigation will be launched. We value every passenger. Darian cut him off politely but firmly. I'm not filing a complaint. I'm stating a condition. Viridian has a $200 million contract with you for sustainable aviation fuel. That contract includes a clause about ethical alignment. Right now, your actions don't align with our values. We're pausing all collaboration until this is resolved to my wife's satisfaction, not mine, hers. There was a long pause on the line. Then Hale said, Mr. Voss, with all due respect, personnel decisions can't be made based on a single incident. This wasn't a single incident, Darian replied. It was a pattern, and my wife shouldn't have had to endure it. By that evening, news began to trickle out, not from Darian, but from within Skyward. A memo circulated among staff about heightened sensitivity in customer interactions. Rumors spread that a high-profile passenger had been mistreated. Social media users started digging. Someone found a passenger on that flight who confirmed the incident. Though they didn't name Aisha, the story began to grow legs. Aisha saw the first post while scrolling through her phone during nap time. Her stomach dropped. They're talking about me, she said, showing Darian her screen. He read it carefully. They're not naming you, and they're focusing on the airline's response, not your identity. That's good. But what if it escalates? She asked. I didn't want this to become public. I know, he said. But sometimes private accountability isn't enough. Systems only change when the cost of ignoring them becomes too high. Over the next 2 days, pressure mounted. A flight attendant union rep gave a vague statement defending hardworking crew members. But then Elias, the kind man who'd brought the towels, reached out anonymously to a journalist. He confirmed the details: the spill, the refusal to help, the manager shutting down his attempt to assist. His account shifted the narrative. Now it wasn't just a passenger upset about a spill. It was about who gets believed, who gets helped, and who gets dismissed. Aisha watched it unfold with mixed feelings. Part of her wanted to disappear, to pretend it never happened. But another part, the part that had spent years advocating for marginalized communities and policy rooms, felt a strange sense of duty. If her experience could expose a deeper problem, wasn't that worth something? Darian sensed her conflict. One evening, as they walked the dog around the neighborhood, he said, "You don't have to speak publicly. You don't have to be the face of this. But if you ever want to, I'll stand behind you, not in front of you." She smiled. "I just wish it hadn't taken a billionaire husband for anyone to care." He stopped walking. "It shouldn't have. But since it did, let's make sure it changes something for the next woman who boards that plane." By the end of the week, Skyward Airlines issued a public apology. Vague, but a start. They announced a comprehensive review of customer service protocols. The 3 crew members involved were placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Industry blogs speculated about the Veridian contract freeze. Investors grew nervous, but the real turning point came when Darian quietly redirected Veridian's legal team. Instead of suing, they drafted a proposal. A partnership to rebuild Skyward's training program from the ground up, with input from civil rights organizations, psychologists, and former passengers who'd experienced bias. The offer wasn't punitive. It was restorative. Aisha read the draft over breakfast. "You're giving them a chance to fix it?" "Yes," Darian said, "but only if they admit it was broken." She thought about that, about how easy it would have been to demand firings, headlines, revenge. But this was harder. It required humility from the airline, courage from her, and faith that people could change. Later that day, she called her mother. "Mom, something happened on my flight." Her mother listened, then said what she always said. "Baby, you carry yourself with dignity. That's your power. Don't let anyone make you feel small for expecting to be treated like a human being." That night, Aisha sat on the porch again, this time alone. The stars were out. She thought about the woman she'd been on that plane, soaked, ignored, trying not to cry. And she thought about the woman she was now, seen, supported, and unexpectedly at the center of something bigger than herself. She didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time since the spill, she didn't feel powerless. Because real power wasn't just wealth or influence. It was the choice to respond with clarity, not cruelty. And that was something no one could take from her. The news broke on a Tuesday morning, not with a press release, but with a quiet email sent to every major aviation trade publication. Veridian Dynamics was pausing its $200 million clean fuel partnership with Skyward Airlines. The reason? Misalignment with core ethical standards regarding passenger dignity and crew accountability. No names were mentioned. No dramatic accusations. Just a cold corporate sentence that sent shockwaves through the industry. Inside Skyward's headquarters, panic spread faster than coffee through the break room. Executives scrambled. Legal teams convened emergency calls. Stock prices dipped slightly, but the real damage was reputational. In an age where travelers shared every delayed bag and rude gate agent online, a story about a black woman being soaked in soda and ignored wasn't just embarrassing, it was toxic. What Skyward didn't know was that Darian hadn't acted alone. While his team handled the business side, Aisha had quietly reached out to 2 people, Dr. Nia Okoro, a behavioral psychologist who specialized in implicit bias in high-stress workplaces, and Malik Ransom, a former airline employee turned civil rights advocate who'd spent years documenting racial disparities in air travel. Over a video call one evening, the 3 of them sketched out something unusual. Not a lawsuit, not a boycott, but a blueprint for change. "We don't just want them to fire people," Aisha said, wrapped in a soft sweater, her kids asleep upstairs. "We want them to understand why it happened in the first place." Malik nodded. Most airlines treat bias training like a checkbox. Watch a 15-minute video, click "I agree," and move on. It doesn't stick. It doesn't change behavior. Dr. Okoro added, "Stress amplifies bias. When crews are overworked, underpaid, and managing hundreds of passengers, their brains default to shortcuts. And those shortcuts often target people who don't fit the default passenger profile, usually white, male, calm. So we rebuild the training from the ground up, Aisha said, with real scenarios, real consequences, and real voices, especially from people who've been on the receiving end. Darian listened from the corner of the room, taking notes. He didn't interrupt. He knew this wasn't his story to lead, but he would make sure it had the resources to succeed. By the end of the week, Viridian released a public statement, not just announcing the pause, but offering a path forward. They proposed funding an independent audit of Skyward's customer service culture, led by a coalition of experts including Dr. Okoro and Malik's organization. The findings would be made public. Recommendations would be binding if Skyward wanted the partnership reinstated. And crucially, affected passengers like Aisha would have a seat at the table. The offer stunned the industry. Most corporate disputes stayed behind closed doors. This was transparent, collaborative, and uncomfortably honest. Skyward's leadership was divided. Some wanted to fight back, call it an overreach. Others saw an opportunity. After all, sustainability was the future of aviation, and Viridian was a leader in that space. Losing them meant falling behind. Then came the leak. Someone inside Skyward, likely Elias, though no one confirmed it, sent a recording to a journalist. It wasn't of the spill itself, but of the crew's post-flight debrief. You could hear the senior cabin manager say, "She made a whole thing out of a little soda. Like we're supposed to drop everything for one passenger." Another voice added, "Classic, always the ones who act like they're owed something." The audio spread like wildfire, not because it was explosive, but because it was ordinary. It sounded like countless offhand comments made in break rooms, staff lounges, and private group chats, comments that revealed a deeper problem, a culture where certain passengers were seen as burdens, not guests. Public reaction was swift. Passengers shared their own stories of being followed in airport shops, questioned repeatedly about their tickets, spoken to like they didn't belong. A viral thread titled "Flying While Black" gathered thousands of posts in 48 hours. Even flight attendants joined in, admitting they'd witnessed bias but felt powerless to speak up. Skyward's CEO, Robert Hale, called Darian again. This time his tone was different. "We accept your proposal," he said. "We'll cooperate fully with the audit." Darian didn't gloat. "Good, but remember, this isn't about saving your contract. It's about saving your credibility." The audit began within days. Dr. Okoro and her team interviewed dozens of current and former Skyward employees, frontline staff, managers, even gate agents. They reviewed hundreds of customer complaint logs, cross-referencing them with passenger demographics. The pattern was clear. Complaints from black passengers were 63% more likely to be labeled unfounded or exaggerated than those from white passengers. Training materials hadn't been updated in 7 years. Role-playing scenarios focused on difficult passengers, almost always depicted as loud, emotional women of color. Meanwhile, Aisha prepared to testify before a congressional subcommittee on transportation equity. She hadn't planned to go public, but after reading the early audit findings, she felt she had to. Not for herself, but for the woman who wouldn't have a billionaire husband to call on. For the teenager flying alone for the first time. For the elder who just wanted to visit her grandkids without being treated like a suspect. She practiced her testimony in the living room, speaking to Zuri and Kofi as if they were lawmakers. "I'm not here to shame one airline," she told them, kneeling on the rug. "I'm here to ask, what kind of world do we want our skies to reflect? One where dignity is reserved for a few, or one where everyone is treated like they belong?" Zuri, wide-eyed, said, "You sound like a superhero." Aisha laughed. "No, baby. I just sound like someone who got tired of being quiet." The day of the hearing, she wore a simple navy dress, dry-cleaned this time, and a small gold pendant her grandmother had given her. She didn't bring notes. She spoke from memory, from experience, from heart. She described the spill, the silence, the sting of being made to feel like a nuisance for asking for a towel. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. But her words carried weight because they were true. Afterward, reporters swarmed, but she declined interviews. "This isn't about me," she told them gently. "It's about the system." Back home, Darian hugged her at the door. "You were incredible." She leaned into him, exhausted but calm. "Now they can't pretend it didn't happen." That night, Skyward announced that the 3 crew members involved, the flight attendant, the purser, and the senior cabin manager, would not return to customer-facing roles. They'd be offered retraining or internal transfers, but never again represent the airline to passengers. It wasn't a firing in the dramatic sense, but it was accountability, and for the first time it felt real. But the real victory came a week later, when Skyward's new head of customer experience, a woman named Elena Cho, recently hired from a hospitality brand known for empathy-driven service, reached out to Aisha directly. "We'd like you to help us design the new training," she said. Not as a victim, as a partner, Aisha thought about it. Then she said yes, because change didn't happen by tearing everything down. It happened by building something better, brick by brick, conversation by conversation, flight by flight. And sometimes the most powerful thing you could do after being poured on was to help others stay dry. The lawsuit arrived on a rainy Thursday, slipped into a thick manila envelope delivered to Viridian's legal department. The 3 former Skyward crew members, now reassigned to ground logistics, were suing for wrongful termination, defamation, and emotional distress. They claimed they'd been made scapegoats in a public relations stunt, and that their careers had been ruined over a minor service error. Their legal team painted Aisha as an entitled passenger who'd weaponized her husband's wealth to destroy hardworking people just trying to do their jobs. Aisha read the summary over breakfast, her coffee going cold in her hands. Zuri was chattering about a school play. Kofi was trying to feed his toast to the dog, and the morning sun filtered through the kitchen blinds like everything was normal. But the words on the screen felt heavy, like stones dropped into still water. "They're saying I ruined their lives," she said quietly. Darian looked up from his tablet. "They're saying what their lawyers told them to say. It's strategy, not truth. But what if people believe it?" she asked. "What if this becomes about me being the angry rich wife instead of about what actually happened?" He reached across the table and took her hand. "Then we let the facts speak. And we keep doing the work. Because while the lawsuit made headlines for a day, something quieter and far more powerful was already unfolding. Skyward had begun rolling out the first phase of its new Customer Dignity program, co-designed by Aisha, Dr. Okoro Malik, and a small group of frontline staff who'd volunteered for change. The training wasn't a lecture. It was a series of real-life scenarios filmed with actors, some based on actual passenger complaints. In one, a black man is repeatedly asked to prove his first-class ticket. In another, an elderly South Asian woman is spoken to in exaggerated English despite speaking fluently. In a third, a young woman in a hijab is singled out for extra screening while others walk through untouched. Trainees didn't just watch. They paused the video, discussed their gut reactions, then rewound and tried again, this time with empathy as the guide. Supervisors were trained not just to manage efficiency, but to notice when a crew member seemed stressed, biased, or dismissive, and to intervene gently, not punitively. Aisha visited one of the pilot sessions in Atlanta. She sat in the back, unannounced, watching as flight attendants role-played responding to a passenger who'd been accidentally bumped from their seat. One trainee instinctively said, "It's not my fault, talk to reservations." But after feedback, she tried again. "I'm so sorry this happened. Let me see how I can make it right for you." That small shift, ownership instead of deflection, was everything. After the session, a young attendant named Tasha approached Aisha. "I saw your testimony," she said, voice low. "My mom's been flying for 20 years. She's been treated like that more times than she can count. Thank you for saying it out loud." Aisha hugged her. "Thank you for wanting to do better." Meanwhile, the lawsuit crawled through the courts. The media circled, hungry for drama. But public sentiment didn't swing the way the plaintiffs hoped. When audio from the flight finally surfaced, verified by an independent forensics firm, people heard not an angry outburst, but a calm woman asking for basic help. They heard the sigh, the mutter, the refusal, and they heard Elias's quiet voice offering towels while being scolded for it. Online, passengers shared side-by-side comparisons. "When I spilled coffee on myself, they brought 3 towels and a new shirt. When my white friend asked for water, they gave her a whole bottle without question." The pattern was undeniable. Even some former Skyward employees spoke up. An anonymous Reddit post from a retired purser went viral. "I saw this happen for years. We were taught to manage certain passengers, not serve them. It's not about one bad apple. It's about the whole barrel." The turning point came during a deposition. The senior cabin manager under oath was asked why she'd reprimanded Elias for offering towels. She hesitated, then said, "We have limited resources. We can't give extra things to every passenger who complains. But Ms. Nosu wasn't complaining, the attorney pressed. She was soaked in soda. Wasn't that an emergency? She wasn't bleeding, the manager replied. The quote spread instantly, not because it was outrageous, but because it was honest. It revealed the cold calculus behind the indifference. Unless your suffering was visible, measurable, dramatic, it didn't count. That night, Aisha cried for the first time since the flight. Not out of sadness, but out of relief, because now no one could pretend it was just a misunderstanding. The truth was out, plain and unvarnished. Darian held her as she wept. You didn't do this alone, he whispered. You gave others permission to speak. The next week, Skyward announced a permanent change. All crew members would now carry emergency comfort kits. Towels, dry clothes, bottled water, not just for spills, but for any passenger in distress. And every new hire would spend a day shadowing customer service advocates from marginalized communities to understand the lived experience of bias, but perhaps the most unexpected ripple came from within Viridian itself. Employees started asking, if we're holding Skyward accountable, what about us? Darian responded by launching an internal equity review across all Viridian operations, from construction sites to boardrooms. Anonymous feedback channels opened. Pay gaps were addressed. Mentorship programs for women of color expanded. Aisha watched it all unfold with quiet awe. This wasn't just about one flight. It was about a shift in what people expected from the world, and from each other. Then came the congressional hearing follow-up. A bipartisan group of lawmakers proposed the Passenger Dignity Act, mandating standardized anti-bias training for all U.S. airlines, with public reporting on complaint resolution by demographic. Aisha was invited to help draft the guidelines. She said yes, but only if frontline workers had equal seats at the table. Change that doesn't include the people doing the work won't last, she told the committee. Back home, life returned to its rhythm. School pickups, grocery runs, bedtime stories. But something had changed in the way Aisha carried herself. She wasn't just a policy consultant anymore. She was a bridge between pain and progress, between silence and action. One evening, as she tucked Kofi into bed, he asked, Mommy, are you famous now? She smiled. No, baby. I'm just someone who said this isn't right and didn't stop saying it. He yawned. I'm proud of you, her heart swelled. Because fame fades. But integrity? That lasts. The lawsuit would eventually be dismissed, not because the crew members were found guilty of malice, but because the court ruled Skyward's actions were within its rights to uphold service standards. No one went to jail. No one was ruined. But accountability had been served, not through punishment, but through transformation. And in the end, that was the real victory, not firing people, but changing the system so fewer people needed to be fired in the first place. As Aisha stood on her porch that night, watching fireflies blink in the warm Georgia air, she thought about the woman on that plane, soaked, silent, trying not to take up space. She wished she could tell her, you mattered, your voice mattered, and because you spoke, someone else might fly home dry, seen, and safe. That was enough. More than enough. Geneva in early spring smelled like whetstone and blooming chestnut trees. Aisha stood backstage at the International Forum on Ethical Innovation, smoothing the lapels of her deep green suit. Her name was about to be called for the Dignity in Action Award, a recognition usually given to diplomats or NGO leaders, not policy consultants who'd simply asked for a towel on a flight months ago. She hadn't wanted the spotlight, but she'd accepted the invitation because the organizers promised the focus wouldn't be on her, but on the ripple her quiet stand had created. From the wings, she watched the audience, rows of people in smart coats and thoughtful expressions, sipping espresso, murmuring in half a dozen languages. None of them knew the full story. They'd read headlines, seen clips of her congressional testimony, maybe even flown on a Skyward flight that now included a dignity checklist in the pre-flight briefing. But they didn't know about the nights she'd lain awake wondering if she'd overreacted, or the moment her daughter asked why someone would pour soda on her mom just because she's brown. When her name was called, she walked out not with swagger but with the same calm she'd used to ask for that towel. The applause was warm, not thunderous, respectful, not worshipful. She stepped to the mic, looked out at the sea of faces, and began not with thank you but with a question. What does it cost to treat someone like they belong? She didn't mention Coca-Cola, didn't name the airline, Didn't talk about her husband's wealth or the lawsuit or the headlines. Instead, she spoke about the flight attendant who'd sighed, the manager who'd looked away, and the quiet man named Elias who'd risked his shift to hand her a towel. She spoke about how systems are built not in boardrooms alone, but in thousands of small choices made every day, in how we listen, how we respond, how we see each other. Dignity isn't a luxury, she said, voice steady. It's the baseline. And when we treat it like an exception, we fail everyone. Afterward, people lined up to speak with her, not for selfies, but to share their own stories. A flight attendant from Kenya said her airline had adopted Skyward's new training. A university student from Brazil said she'd written her thesis on the case. An elderly man from Oslo, eyes glistening, whispered, "My wife was treated like that once. She never flew again." Thank you for giving her story a voice. Aisha listened to each one, making eye contact, offering a hand or a nod. She didn't rush. Because this human connection was the real work. Not the awards, not the policies, but the moment someone feels seen. Back in Atlanta a week later, life returned to its familiar rhythm. Zuri was rehearsing for the school play. She'd landed the lead role as a young scientist. Kofi had started calling every bug in the backyard, "my friend." Darian was knee-deep in a new project, solar-powered bus terminals for rural communities. And Aisha? She'd just been named to the advisory board of the newly formed National Air Travel Equity Commission, a direct result of the Passenger Dignity Act, now moving through Congress. But none of that felt like victory. The real victory was quieter. It was in the email she received from Skyward's new head of training. Our customer complaint resolution rate for passengers of color has improved by 78% since the program launched. It was in the photo Malik sent her. Elias, now a lead trainer, teaching a class of new hires how to de-escalate with empathy, not authority. It was in the note tucked into her mailbox from a neighbor she barely knew. Saw your speech. My daughter's flying alone next month. I feel better knowing people like you are watching. One Saturday morning, the family visited the airport not to fly, but to meet a group of high school students Aisha was mentoring through a youth leadership program. As they walked through the terminal, Zuri pointed to a poster near Gate B12. It showed a diverse group of passengers with the words, "You belong here." "Is that because of you, Mommy?" she asked. Aisha knelt beside her. "No, baby. It's because of all of us who said this isn't right, and then worked together to fix it." Later, over lunch at the airport cafe, Kofi spilled his juice. Without hesitation, the server brought a stack of napkins, a clean cloth, and a small cup of water. "Accidents happen," she said with a kind smile. "Let's get you sorted." Aisha watched, heart full. No sigh, no eye roll, just care, offered freely. That night, as she tucked the kids into bed, Zuri asked, "Are we famous now?" Aisha laughed softly. "Fame is loud and temporary. What we're building is quiet and lasting." Kofi yawned. "I still think you're a superhero." She kissed his forehead. "The best kind, the one who believes kindness should be standard, not optional." Meanwhile, Darian sat at his desk, finalizing the launch of the Nwosuvos Institute for Ethical Travel. It wasn't a vanity project. It was a living lab, funding research, training, and community-led audits for airlines, hotels, even public transit systems worldwide. The first grant had gone to a cooperative of Black and Indigenous flight attendants in South America, who were designing their own anti-bias curriculum in their native languages. He didn't do it for praise. He did it because Aisha had shown him that real change wasn't about power. It was about partnership. Months later, Skyward Airlines became the first carrier to earn the Institute's Dignity Certified seal. The ceremony was small, no press, no fanfare, just crew members, passengers, and advocates sharing a meal in a hangar lit by string lights. Aisha gave a short toast. To the day when we don't need certifications to remind us to be human. As the year turned, the story that began with a spilled soda faded from headlines. But its legacy grew in ways no one could have predicted. Other airlines adopted similar programs. Customer service schools rewrote their curricula. Even cruise lines and train operators reached out to the Institute for guidance. And Aisha? She kept doing her work, advising cities on green policy, mentoring young women in STEM, showing up at school plays and soccer games. She never called herself an activist. She was just a woman who believed that how we treat each other in small moments shapes the world we live in. One evening, as she and Darian sat on the porch watching fireflies blink in the warm Georgia dusk, he handed her a small envelope. Inside was a note from the Geneva Forum, along with a photo from the award night. On the back, someone had written, "You made me believe change is possible." She folded the note carefully and tucked it into her pocket. "We did," she said, leaning into him. "No," he replied gently. "You did. I just made sure you were heard," she smiled, because in the end that was the point, not to be saved but to be seen, not to be famous but to be faithful, to truth, to dignity, to the quiet belief that even the smallest act of courage can shift the sky. And somewhere, on a plane crossing the Atlantic, a flight attendant offered a warm towel to a tired passenger without being asked. Not because of a policy,